Hello and welcome to the first Puffin short. I made this short because we hit the amazing milestone of a whole 100 views. I also broke the 2-digit category for subscribers. As of the time of writing this, I have a whole 13 subscribers. I know all 18 of you are my friends, so it's not really a big deal, but still, the support means a lot to me, so thanks. As a celebration, let's talk about what capitalism actually means. This is a topic I've actually wanted to do for a while, but couldn't figure out a good way to shoehorn it into any other script that I'm writing. So I figured a short video like this would be perfect. Whenever self-proclaimed socialists and self-proclaimed capitalists get into arguments, at some point the topic comes up about how capitalism is the freest system. Socialists will then chime in about how corporations making deals with governments or buying votes isn't free, and then they either both devolve into yelling at each other about how the other doesn't know what they're talking about, or they both move on, smugly confident that the other is just uneducated. And this is a perfect example of two people speaking the same language but speaking different languages. It's one of the very few cases that isn't because the leftist is trying to redefine words to define themselves as the righteous one. When the self-proclaimed capitalist says corporations making deals with the government isn't capitalism, it's because they view that as corporatism, and rightly so. Or in the most extreme cases, that's post-Marxist socialism, also sometimes called fascism, but that's a video for another time. The self-proclaimed capitalist's view is that governments interfering with the market for any cause, including because corporations pay them to, isn't a free market and thus isn't capitalism. But let's go back to the origin of the word. Prior to my studies, I thought that the word capitalism had its roots back in the origins of economics. But it turns out I was wrong. The word was effectively coined in 1850 by Louis Blanc, a French socialist, who used it thusly, quote, "What I call capitalism, that is to say the appropriation of capital by some to the exclusion of others." Later, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, also a French socialist, picked it up in the 1860s, defining it as, quote, "economic and social regime in which capital, the source of income, does not generally belong to those who make it through their labor." You can tell he's a socialist. And lastly, Marx and Engels basically defined capitalism as anything that wasn't socialism. After this, economists started getting slammed for being capitalists, for supporting free markets and saving the world from poverty. And then they said, well, if capitalism is just a fancy word for free markets and saving people from poverty, then yes, I'm a capitalist, and that's not a bad thing. And they were technically correct. Their views did fall within the definition of capitalism, but saying that their acceptance of the title made them in favor of government corruption and government intervention is like saying Gandhi would have been a supporter of the Nazis just because both ideologies were nationalist, or more contemporarily, like saying Trump supporters are Nazis because many of them are nationalists. In case it isn't obvious, the vast majority of people who call themselves capitalists don't mean that they support anything and everything including corruption as long as it's just not socialism. That's absurd. Usually what they're talking about are specifically free markets. The degree of freedom from interference may vary, there is a spectrum, but they don't mean, yeah, I love it when corporations buy votes. The reason why the self-proclaimed capitalists scoff at the self-proclaimed socialists' comments about corporate corruption with government power is because having a government interfering isn't a free market. But when socialists say that corporations abusing power is a major problem of capitalism, they're using the original socialist definition of people who own things make it capitalism. So, of course, any time that anyone with capital does anything corrupt, especially with money or property, also known as capital, that would be capitalism because it happened in a place where you owned things. It's kind of a useless description as it describes most of the entire world, and because you could just say not socialism. But hey, opposite words do exist. We have the word dry because we didn't want to always say not wet. Because of this confusion of definitions, though, there is a movement that I ran into among economists calling themselves free marketers specifically, instead of capitalists. And given that that is an unambiguous stance to take on what you actually want economically, I think it's a good movement. I have only briefly encountered it, so I haven't had the chance to look into how big the movement is yet, but it is one I'm very interested in the progress of. Now, lastly, let me say that there are both free marketers and socialists who honestly don't know what these words mean. I have heard free marketers completely flip the definitions, assuming that capitalism means free markets and socialism means anything that isn't free markets, calling things like environmental policy or the existence of property taxes socialist because it limits the freedom of the market. When AOC made massive profits on selling her merchandise and then said that it wasn't capitalism because, quote, transactions aren't capitalism, end quote, despite transactions requiring capital to be a transaction, she showed that her economics degree didn't seem to teach her any definition of what capitalism was, and was apparently just meant to radicalize her into being another useful idiot for communism. But that's a video for another time. So next time you're in a debate with either a socialist or a free marketer, depending on which side of the fence you're on, if you actually care about getting your point across instead of just wanting to feel intellectually superior, you might want to explain what you mean by the semi-ambiguous word capitalism before you use it. Thanks for listening. If you made it to this point in the video, be sure to like it if you didn't hate it, leave a comment letting me know your thoughts or yelling at me about how wrong I am, and subscribe if you'd like to see more content. I could probably do an entire essay video on this topic, but I figured it might get redundant fast. However, if you'd like me to do a more deep dive of this, let me know in the comments as well. Take care, and we'll see you next time.